I would like to next turn to Monica and discuss how do you actually maximize the contribution from both sides. And Oliver mentioned the concept of the necessary evil. So in order it not to be so, how should the boards maximize the value creation in relation to the CEO, and how can the CEO leverage the board's competencies? It goes both ways.
Absolutely, it goes both ways.
Yeah.
So apart from the most obvious tasks for the board, hire and fire the CEO, approve strategy, priorities, and monitor risks, the board basically is there to support and challenge the CEO. So how is that done? If we look at how the board best sort of maximize the value in relation to the CEO, the best chairs these days are very explicit when asking the CEO, what do you need? What do you need from us? Clear and simple questions. Could be 2 questions before, well, in advance of board meetings. Specify what you want us to focus on and prepare, and then we deal with that. That's a very simple but powerful manner. Also, as I mentioned earlier, from the board's perspective, is of course to just in terms of different CEOs, different cycles of the company, different phases, and so on. And I think we touched on that again, finding balance between challenging and supporting, and be very thoughtful in what you ask from the CEO. And the best boards also in relation to the CEO is focused on giving another perspective, and often the longer term perspective, but often also just another perspective. These days we see in BoardClic that it's much more common to work with a high number of scenarios as well, because of where the world is going. So it's also setting those scenarios and giving a perspective on those. And BoardClic, we are an analytics platform for advanced evaluations. We of course see that really professional board evaluations should be used, because that's where the board gets the feedback from the CEO, how to maximize the value output. So that's an obvious manner. Feedback is always very important, and again, in terms of how the board should be working, is really to interact with key employees. As I mentioned earlier, we see in BoardClic that 30% of the highest performing boards have a high level of key employee interaction. So that's a super good way to work, I think. If you look at how the CEO can maximize, McKinsey recently wrote an article about the best CEOs understand how to really leverage the board. I think it's all about that you have the right competences in the board. You as CEO, you are very explicit what you need and who should be on the board. And also that to have self-insight as the CEO, that you cannot know everything. It's impossible for anyone running an organization today to know your company, your sector, data analytics, cybersecurity. So you need to harness the full intelligence of the board. I think that's very important. And also look at the way CEOs work with the board or chairman. It's much more about cooperation and communication these days. Earlier, it was much more governance and risk. They are still there, but much more like a cooperative environment. And some boards, some CEOs go the way that you set up the manner that board directors can have a direct line into members of your C-suite. Some like that, some don't, because it's a governance issue sometimes, and that you don't surpass the CEO. But if you set the right governance model, that can be a powerful way of giving more value.
Absolutely, and maximizing the value contribution is about the fine balance. So how do you, Oliver, assist boards in identifying candidates who can preserve and create this fine balance?
It's a great question. One of the classics that we see boards coming to us saying was, we need someone with previous PLC experience. And usually when we dig into that, there's a small proportion of boards that genuinely need previous PLC experience because they haven't got anyone else on there with that level of technical detail. But more often than not, they're using it as a proxy for someone who knows how to operate on a board. And actually the pool of people who are able to do that is much broader And so we would, they would tend to encourage them to look beyond that, and they start looking at people who've had other board experience. Or it might be in the non-profit sector, or it might be in a committee, or it might be in some given role. And actually what we see from a lot of the boards using the platform is when you sort of go out beyond that traditional pool of PLC experience, actually you can find some really exceptional people. The other area I'd say we sort of see boards differentiating themselves on that front is around the way they assess people. So the classic way they assess them at an interview is a one-to-one interview or a panel interview, but they never see that individual operating as part of a group, which is clearly a fundamental dynamic, and understanding how to operate with your fellow non-execs as well as the exec team. So really good boards are creating job-specific tests effectively for those board members to see how they operate in that dynamic, and making sure they understand how to navigate the line between exec and non-exec.
Absolutely. It's interesting to take a look at the poll results here that have been oscillating, which shows that the best practices is still an evolving area in this particular question. So some people think that the executives could be more involved. Some think that they're not as involved or more involved than necessary, but some clearly think that there is a fine balance. So these are the trends to watch out for.